We saw how the Quad also resorted to talking of the Indo-Pacific, something that China had taken objection to. But the Prime Minister has set the tone really as far as relationship with India's neighbors is concerned. And in the interview to the Japanese Daily, the Prime Minister spoke about Pakistan and how the onus lies on the Pakistani establishment to ensure that they shun terror. Only then can India and Pakistan have normal ties. That is something that India has always maintained. And Maria, that is a message that has been reiterated. And we've all seen what's happening in Pakistan, the kind of instability, the violence that we've seen, especially in the recent past, that has had the world on edge. At such a time, India has made it clear that before there is any talk of normalizing ties with Pakistan, they have to ensure that they shun terror.
Yes, that's right, because peace and tranquility in the border areas are essential for normal bilateral ties. Those are the words of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This has been said with regards to China, and the future development of Indo-China relationship can only be based on mutual respect, mutual sensitivity and mutual interest. The Prime Minister has said that when it is about normalizing ties and how it will benefit the wider region and the world. But as far as Pakistan is concerned, I think the important takeaway in that interview is the Prime Minister putting an onus clearly and directly on Pakistan to take necessary steps in this regard. The Prime Minister saying that any talks with Pakistan can happen only if the atmosphere is conducive, free from terrorism and hostilities. So I think the Prime Minister's message to Pakistan again is a big takeaway because you know, we have had that history of partition in 1947 and because of these two countries being in our neighborhood, on one hand you have Pakistan, on the other China. India's position on a number of subjects vis-a-vis the world is very different from other countries, Poonam. And I think India has effectively communicated that to Quad nations in particular, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been doing so with other countries too, trying to communicate that though India stands for peace and tranquility, but it also believes in ensuring that its sovereignty is protected, and that when China becomes an aggressor, India has to ensure that its own land is protected. And that's where the Prime Minister says that any talks with these countries can happen. It is based on mutual respect as far as China is concerned, but when it comes to Pakistan, the challenges are completely different. It is about this country which has to give up perhaps terrorism, which is not to be.
And Maria, the China bit that is a part of this particular interview is also interesting because the Prime Minister has made it clear that peace and tranquility is extremely essential in border areas. Only then can we have normal bilateral ties with China. That is also something that External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has said in the past about relations with India and China that have been frosty for the last 2 or 3 years, because we've seen several unilateral attempts from the Chinese side to try and change status quo. But India is not going to take that lying down. That message has been sent out loud and clear. And China would be wary of what's happening over this weekend in Japan, isn't it? Because India is part of the G7 high table, so to say, a special invitee. Also, there is the Quad summit. The major focus of the Quad in itself is to ensure that we counter China. So China is going to be on the edge this weekend.
Yes, that's right. China would be watching the takeaways from this. Russia and Ukraine would be watching what the world leaders have to say in Hiroshima. But talking specifically in the context of China, I think the Prime Minister has spoken about also the 2020 Galwan clashes where 20 Indian and 4 Chinese soldiers lost their lives. The Prime Minister says that, you know, India is fully prepared and committed to protecting its sovereignty and dignity. And when it is about China, it is only about normal bilateral ties that India is hoping for. And the relationship between the two countries is based on mutual respect, sensitivity and interest. And the Prime Minister saying that normalizing the ties would benefit the entire region greatly. So he has insisted on normalizing ties with China. But when you look at the clear, the messaging that is going one to China, another one to Pakistan, you realize that how India is viewing these two countries and how India is only putting the onus back on Pakistan to take necessary steps with regards to hostilities and terrorism. You can see the movement of the traffic police and the security agencies here in Hiroshima before the arrival of the Prime Minister, who's expected any moment to arrive at this hotel where he will be meeting the Indian diaspora. But before that, that interview which he has given to the newspaper here, certainly setting the tone of what Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be telling the world leaders, what his message would be at the G7 outreach sessions.
Right, and for hours together now, several people from the Indian diaspora, from kids to the elderly, they're all waiting to catch a glimpse of the Prime Minister, hoping to perhaps have a conversation with him. Do stay on with me, Maria. That mood and color is what we're getting from on ground in Hiroshima for our viewers. But this visit of the Prime Minister is extremely significant diplomatically as well, which is why we have Foreign Affairs Analyst Robinder Sachdev with us on the broadcast. And Mr. Sachdev, as far as the Prime Minister's visit is concerned, apart from the optics of the connect that he's had with the diaspora, the unveiling of Mahatma Gandhi's bust there and the messaging that sense, there is extremely important business that the Prime Minister is looking at over the next 2 days. That includes bilaterals with his counterparts, also the meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky, and that is going to be extremely crucial.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, definitely, yes. The meeting with Zelensky will be crucial, will be interesting, and will be important, as are the other meetings that you mentioned. I mean, the other meetings that you mentioned also, you see, the world has changed ever since the COVID and the Russian-Ukraine conflict, right? So in a way, the world, all players, all countries, you mentioned the word optics. It is optopolitics which is now playing out, Optics has become so much, kind of integrated with the geopolitics or vice versa. It is geopolitics and what are the signals coming out from that which we are seeing. So in today's day and age, if we look at the world, I mean, firstly, it's a meeting of the G7 and of course there's a bilateral. But, is India not among the top 8 economies of the world today? Right? And if so, then was there not a time that the G7 was actually a G8? Remember, Russia was part of the G8 and then Russia was disinvited from the G8. So is it now time, or is it not time for India to be a member of the G8? That's one big question, I would think, looking ahead in the coming years. I mean, we are an economy somewhere, fifth, sixth, whatever. You can look at whichever terms, EPP terms or whichever terms, we are definitely amongst the top 8 economies in the world of today. So that's one. Because, the advantage that has, the more stable, deeper, wider political relations we have with the other G7 countries, the more India is seen as an attractive destination for the investors from those countries. Okay, no matter, India is a rising destination and we have investors and business partners coming in from all the countries, but the more India is seen as at the table with deep relations with all the countries, the more the international business will be attracted and will look to come to India. That's one. The advantages of being in the G8, I would say. Second, yes, the bilaterals. Very much the bilaterals are there, but also remember there's a quadrilateral, right? The 4 nations of the Quad meeting. So definitely very, very important meetings coming up over the next couple of days.
Absolutely important meetings for the Prime Minister, not just in Japan, but even when he heads to Australia after that. That is also when there are several key meetings that are going to be held. And Robinder Sachdev, China is going to be jittery. They're going to be on the edge of their seats over the next few days because the Quad meeting is going to happen tomorrow. Countering China is the big agenda of the Quad. The Prime Minister, India, is at the high table of the G7 nations. So there is, it'll be interesting, in fact, to see what kind of reactions come out from Beijing.
Absolutely, totally. And you just mentioned the Prime Minister's next, steps of this visit. The next visit, in fact, before Australia is Papua New Guinea. Right? That in itself is something for the first time that India is doing. India is hosting a summit with the Pacific Ocean island nations as an annual summit, and Biden was supposed to come to it, right? So it was to be a summit hosted by India along with these nations and Biden there. Okay, Biden is not coming, but still, what this means is that India is taking a serious play in the Indo-Pacific nations.
Absolutely. Indo-Pacific, that term in itself is something that has irked China many a times in the past. Robinder Sachdev, thank you so much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18.